So good afternoon and thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about renting Spanish property. Many people actually move to Spain and want to rent rather than buy, or they want to rent before finding out about a specific region, so they find it easier to move around Spain by just renting. Some people just plan to buy straight away, and many plan to rent before they buy and decide to rent longer term. Finding suitable property and understanding the rules in Spain is not at all easy, and we've got Alex Radford from My Lawyer in Spain here this afternoon, who's going to explain the rules for short and long-term rentals in Spain, and also for people that have a property already that maybe want to rent it out too. And we'll also look at the requirements if you're investing in a property and plan to let it out as a holiday rental. So, hello, Alex.
Hi, Ali. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So would you mind telling me a little bit about you and My Lawyer in Spain?
Yeah, certainly. So basically, my parents moved to Spain in 1981, and they rented an apartment to start off with. I remember it was a 10-story apartment. I'm scared of heights then. I'm still scared of heights now. In Los Poliches in Fuengirola, but that was walking distance to the international school that I then went to. And we had a swimming pool, and there was kind of guys playing football, which I joined them to play football in the afternoons, and it was great. That was like when I was 8, 9. So growing up in Spain was wonderful. But yeah, they rented first of all, yeah, so that was good. So I grew up in Spain, went to an English school to start with, and then Spanish school, finished high school here, and then returned to the UK in '92 to go to university. And then I started practicing as a lawyer in '99, qualified in 2001, and then came back to Spain in 2003. And then since then, I've been acting for mainly English-speaking people across all of Spain and the islands in buying, selling, renting, and inheriting property in Spain, and also doing business in Spain. And we set up My Lawyer in Spain 7 years ago. Head office is in Marbella, shortly due to open an office up in Ciudad Quesada in the Costa Blanca, which we're all very excited about. And then we've got satellite offices in the Canaries, in Tenerife, in Mallorca, Madrid, Bilbao, Valencia, Almeria, and Murcia. So that's us.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting because when we came to Spain, we actually rented as well and ended up buying the house that we rented. So in general terms, when people decide that they found a property that they want to rent, what do they need to organise with the landlord?
Yeah, so typically the landlord will produce the contract, and obviously much depends on how long you rent it out for. So this is when we distinguish between long-term lets and short-term lets. Long-term lets is usually 12 months and more, and short-term lets would be anything less than that, or holiday lets. If you're gonna buy a property to rent out, then you'll need what's known as a license of first occupation. If you're going to rent a property out for holiday lets, you need a license of first occupation. For long-term lets, you don't need that. Typically, so a client, the landlord produces the contract. That contract would set out the terms, so how long they're going to rent for, notice period, deposit, whether the rent will go up in line with inflation each year, and then usually an inventory. That's it's a kind of fairly straightforward. Most landlords will prepare them in Spanish only. We obviously prepare all our contracts in a kind of double column in English and Spanish. And yeah, once that's agreed, then clients would sign the contract on all pages, pay the deposit to landlord. I'd recommend all payments are made by bank transfer into the landlord's account. And there's clear provisions about the return of the deposits at the end of the duration of the contract.
So the difference between what's called a short-term and a long-term rental in time, what would the time difference be?
Yeah, so a long-term let, usually, if someone's coming out here with a view to buying but renting first to get their feet on the ground and figure out which areas they like, I suggest that they go for, say, a 6-month rental contract. And then if they anything longer, if they wanted to say 12 months, that's what we would then consider to be a long-term let. Because after someone's been in a property for 12 months, they can automatically extend it by law to up to 5 years. So that's the difference. Short term would be anything under 12 months. And then if we've got clients who've been renting properties in say development, like kind of holiday developments at the moment, because there's not many holiday makers coming to Spain at the moment because of the COVID situation, and they're kind of just renting on a monthly basis. So it really just depends, Ali, on the type of property and the seller's circumstances. But if you're looking for a property and looking for properties to buy, I would say no more than 6 months, and I wouldn't recommend that you pay the full rent up front, because once you pay the money over, once if you've handed over all the monies for the rental contract to the landlord, there's no incentive then for the landlord to come back and fix anything if anything goes wrong. So I think you've always got to, typically you would give them a couple of months rent, and then maybe another month's rent for the deposit, but then I pay them on a regular basis.
So what sort of deposit is normally required? Is it just a month, or is it more than that? And are there actually laws that protect you if you've paid a deposit?
Yeah, so basically what we call it the LAU. It's the LAU, Ley de Arrendamientos Urbanos, and it's the kind of urban rentals law, and that kind of sets out the typical terms and conditions that apply. So, for example, what I talked about, if you rent for 12 months, then you can automatically stay for up to 5 years. So long as you continue to pay the rent, etc. There is an exception to that if the landlord had fallen on hard times and didn't have a main property to live in, he had to live in his rental, his property that you're renting out. He can actually issue proceedings and recover possession of the property on that basis. But that's kind of extreme circumstances. But normally a deposit would be 2 months, 2 months up front, and then typically a damage deposit as well.
Okay. And obviously in the UK, you have to prove that you've got good credit rating. What actually happens in Spain? Is it necessary to prove that you've got employment or that you can pay the rent? What do you need to provide? Yeah,
I mean, again, put yourself in the landlord's situation. They want to make sure that they're not going to let someone in who is going to pay them a deposit and then stop paying the rent. So we acted for clients recently who let out the property, and the tenants were moving into the area. They were new to the area. They had they're self-employed, and we asked them. They couldn't really provide much. There wasn't an employment history there because they're self-employed, and so we basically asked them for 6 months up front, and that was the condition for them to rent it, and they accepted that. So they paid 6 months up front. So he obviously didn't listen to this seminar. I'd say never pay up front, but actually that was the only way he could get into that particular property, because he didn't have a credit rating, and he accepted that. But it's quite flexible. It's what the parties can negotiate. But generally speaking, 2 months rent, and then a month's damage deposit.
Okay. And supposing you've got a real estate agent that's actually found you the property, how much do they not typically charge, and who has to pay for it?
Yeah, I think you've got to be very careful here, because a lot of people do come undone on this one, and who's paying for what, and typically the landlord would pay the agent's fees. So the example I gave you, we got to completion. I say completion. We got to the point of where all parties met. So the agent was there, the tenant, and the landlord, and we signed the rental contract. A payment was made, and basically, the agent took 1 month's rent as their commission. So it's important, I think, when you're asking about, if you're looking for rental properties, that you basically ask them who's going to pay their commission up front. Usually a good agent will say, look, my commission will come from the landlord, but if the tenant's got to pay it, just find it out up front. Because you've got to remember, agents aren't regulated in Spain, so there's no fixed rules, I'm afraid to say.
Okay, good advice. And people that are thinking about renting out property and obviously concerned because they're moving to a completely different country and this is the first time in Spain, what are there protections for them legally? And are there controls on both what the tenant can and can't do, and also what the landlord can and can't do?
Yeah, so typically we'd insert in the contract if it's a year's rental, which is then automatically extended by 12 months. We'd insert there, for example, that the first 6 months, even though they're not paying 6 months up front, but they can't leave within 6 months, so they would be obliged to pay the full 6 months if they left beforehand. The landlord, if the landlord needs to come into the property to view it, to inspect it, they've got to give a certain amount of notice. A reasonable amount of notice would be 2 days, and then in a typical rental contract would set out who pays what. So typically the landlord would pay the community fees if it's an apartment or you're on a development. They would pay the community fees and the town hall rates and insurance for the property, and then the tenant would pay the water, electric, Wi-Fi, and I'd always recommend that the tenant takes out their own home and contents insurance as well, just in case that there's anything gets stolen or damaged.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the landlords can actually take back the property if they want to move in there, but are there other instances where the landlord can take back the property?
Yeah, obviously, if there's consistent breaches of the contract, so for example, non-payment of rent is right up there, but also making a lot of noise. The community of owners, if you're on a community of owners, the property is bound, or the owners and the tenants are bound by the statutes of the community of owners, and those statutes will have certain rules. Typically, like you can't make any noise after 11 o'clock and before 8 o'clock in the morning. And if you were consistently making noise, then not only the landlord but also the community of owners can take action against you to evict you from that property. So you've got to be careful about that. But by and large, it's rare for a tenant to be evicted unless they don't pay the rent. If there are any issues, if the tenant, for example, is not happy with other owners in the block, we've had situations whereby a tenant has rented and a neighbour is causing a lot of noise. So the tenant has contacted us, and we've basically let the administrator of the community and the president of the community know, and they've then spoken to that other neighbour and asked them to tone down the noise. But if there's persistent behaviour, then, as I said, the community of owners can take action to evict owners. And also pets. Just bear in mind, for example, some developments don't like pets being left in properties and rented out. So that's, depending on the community, they can restrict ownership of pets at the property by tenants. Those are probably the main controls that I'd say we come across. And the other one is holiday lets. Some communities don't like holiday lets at all, so they'd only want you to rent out the property long term. So if you're looking at buying a property as an investment to let it out as a holiday let, check when we have a client buying a property, we always ask for the minutes, the last 3 years, the community minutes. So basically, on an annual basis, the community will meet and they'll discuss the topics of the day. Does the X block need repainting, gardening, etc., pool cleaning? And I attended a community meeting last summer, well, actually the summer before now, and the community were trying to restrict holiday rentals. And some communities do manage to get that passed, which means that, yeah, the landlord then wouldn't be able to rent out the property unless, rent it out for holiday lets, unless they had approval beforehand and it was registered with the touristic authority. So that's something to bear in mind, that communities of owner restricting holiday lets. And if you're viewing properties, I'd suggest you get the tenant, sorry, the estate agent to ask the owner and the seller of the property if there are any such restrictions, and obviously then instruct your lawyer who's active in the purchase to ask the community of owners as well. So typically, if you're buying on a development, you buy in Spain you always buy freehold, but when you also become a shareholder in the community of owners, and you'll pay community fees on a regular basis. And the community is run by a professional administrator, and they'll be supported by an elected president and secretary and treasurer. So it's important to kind of find out that information before you buy, especially if you're interested in holiday lets.
Okay. And if the landlord decides he wants to take back the property and you've rented it, how much notice does he have to give you?
Again, that normally would be set out in the contract. So a reason, it can be as little as 30 days notice. I think for the longer term contracts, I'd insert kind of 2 months notice to give you enough time to actually move out.
Okay. And at the end of the tenancy, how can I guarantee I'm going to get my damaged deposit back?
Okay, so yeah, we obviously you've got to look after the property, leave it in the same or a better condition than you found it. I'd certainly recommend taking photos of the property when you go in. So there's a kind of a photographic inventory of the property, and also set of doors and the fixtures and fittings and equipment that's in the property. So have a good stack of photographs to rack that up. And then, interesting, in Spain, they actually, each region has, for example, Andalusia in particular, you can actually deposit the deposit for a rental with the Andalusian government. And that would kind of guarantee that you get it back at the end of the term. But not many people use that, because it's kind of it's unwieldy, it's a bit quite bureaucratic and administrative. But that each region does have or other regions have similar arrangements in place. By and large, typically deposit would be left with a landlord. The landlord would go in and inspect it, say, yeah, that's okay, there's your money. Or if X items are being broken or there's damage to the property, they'd get a quote to repair those items and then refund any difference to you. Okay.
And if I've decided I want to buy a property in Spain and let it out, what documents do I need to actually put together to let it out?
So if you want to rent a property out, then you need an energy certificate. So if you buy a property, the seller has to provide you with an energy certificate. That's usually valid from 10 years from the date that they acquired the energy certificate. Obviously, the rental contract with the inventory in place. And then if you're renting long term, you don't need the license of first occupation, and you don't need to be registered with the tourist authority. And I say long term, long term is 12 months onwards, but for the purposes of the touristic rental authorities in each autonomous region in Spain, if you're letting for less than 3 months, they consider that to be short-term rentals. And in that case, if you're letting for short-term, you have to register the property with the regional tourist authority, and you have to have a license of first occupation in place. Okay, so that's the key documents. If you're looking at buying a property to rent out, you have to have that license of first occupation. And in other areas, such as the Canaries, you need a touristic license. So we're acting for people at the moment looking at some of the islands, Tenerife and Fuerteventura, and they want to buy a property with the aim to rent it out. So our advice to them is, look, you need, when you're talking to the agents, let them know you wish to rent it out, and ensure that the properties that they show you have those touristic licenses in place.
Okay. And what sort of tax is payable?
Okay, so when you rent your property in Spain, you have to pay tax on a quarterly basis. You've got to submit those declarations. We can help you with those tax returns. And depending on the nationality, Europeans pay tax at 19%. They pay that here in Spain. And non-EU nationals, so now British people, Americans, Canadians, people from the Middle East, China, etc., they would pay tax at 24%. And the bad news there is that the costs of the rental are not deductible. So if insurance, any mortgage interest, management cost, advertising, cleaning and handovers, those costs are not deductible. So you've got to try and build that into the rental.
Okay. And do you need to be self-employed to rent out a property?
No. I mean, obviously, retired people can rent out a property. Again, it's up to the landlord and for you to decide on whether you're an eligible tenant. You're going to be a good tenant. You're going to pay the rent. But typically, what we have seen as well is tenants or prospective tenants showing landlords that they've got money in the bank account sufficient to cover off the first 6 months or 12 months, and that they've then got pensions or income coming in. Okay. And you don't have to be self-employed now.
Well, there's a couple of questions in the chat, and if anybody wants to add more questions in the chat, please feel free. The first question: how easy is it to rent out with animals? And are there extra deposits needed or insurance you need to take out?
Well, animals is a big word, Ali, isn't it? I mean, what kind of animals are we talking about?
It was dogs.
It was dogs, yeah. So again, that you've got to let the landlord know up front, and the agent, that you're going to be renting the property and you're going to have dogs and what kind of size of, what size dogs you've got. But yeah, if you moved into the property and didn't let them know that you had dogs, they could actually terminate the rent and you could lose your deposit. So I'd certainly let the landlord know up front, and that there might be an extra cleaning cost at the end of it. And
do you need to take out any insurance to protect the property if you've got a dog, or?
No, not generally. But again, if you're renting, I'd certainly recommend taking out contents insurance. So you might want to take out additional insurance to cover any pet damage, but hopefully that your pet's well behaved and it won't cause much damage.
Yeah. Can you actually break a 6-month contract?
Yeah. So again, it depends on what the terms and conditions of the rental contract say, how much notice is provided up front. Yeah.
Okay. And is it more normal in Spain to have furnished or unfurnished property to rent out? And does it include the white goods usually?
Yeah, typically I'd say most properties come furnished. So what we saw, last year as a result of the pandemic, lots of property owners who were used to renting the properties out for holiday lets turned to long-term rentals. So they let those properties out fully furnished, and now they're going back to holiday lets, and they didn't take out the furniture in between. Okay. But yeah, it really does depend. When you look on those websites, the Quieros of the world, the Idealistas, those great website, property portals and websites. When people post their advert to rent, it will say, long term, 12 months plus, etc. And it will typically say, pets allowed or not allowed. So certainly look at that. And typically they would insist on a minimum period. Okay.
And you mentioned earlier that buildings insurance is usually done by the landlord, but if it's their own contents, you still would need to insure them as a tenant?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to rely on the landlord's insurance to make a claim, because in case they've got a premium or an excess they've got to pay. So I'd recommend taking out your own insurance out.
Okay. And with the new residencia requirements, can you get on a PADRON with a short-term rental?
Yeah, so we're active for clients across the country, applying for residency, golden visa residency, and the non-lucrative visa residency. And what we typically do is in that rental contract, we list all the tenants. so that basically once the contract is signed, they can go along to the town hall, show the town hall that contract, and with that contract, they can then register on the PADRON, which is the census, and then the town hall will issue that a certificate of empadronamiento, which confirms that they're on the census, and therefore that's a much needed document for the residency process.
Okay, great.
Alex, I was with you when you did your last Zoom meeting, and it was with a lady called Joanne Alderton.
Yes.
She was with you. I've since had a further meeting, a Zoom meeting with Joanne, and our intention is to probably go over there in October to have a look round. Yeah, because we both have retirement age now, and we're looking to retire next year over in Spain when our tenancy runs out here. Now, she suggests we meet up, and she will take us around various areas for the day out. I don't know. Is that the right way of going about it?
Yeah, I think I think the key is if you lots of people start looking at properties, they're like, I can rent that, boom, boom, and they're not familiar with the area. So I think it's really important. First of all, decide what region you want to live in, to rent in. Visit the various towns in that region, and then once you're comfortable with that region, then look for the property. So yeah, agents typically would give you a guided tour of those areas, and you'll get a feel for it as you drive around. And it's actually, I think it's a great thing to do because you've got a local person showing you local areas.
Yeah, I think that's going to be easier than my wife and myself hiring a car and traveling around all the agents and then going to find these houses where Joanne will probably know where everything is, because she collates all the rental venues, doesn't she?
Yeah, exactly. But I still recommend that you do hire a car and go around to the areas on your own, because you might find different towns, or you might want to go back and have a good walk around. I'll give you an example. When we moved back to Spain in 2003, I was working in Nerja, and my wife was in the UK. But the way we planned it was that basically I handed in my notice, and then she handed her notice in a month later. So I finished earlier than her. I came out to Spain, and so I was kind of unemployed, and she was paying for me, which was great. And I came out to Spain and found a property, and went along to Nerja. I was working as a lawyer at a law firm in Nerja, so I wanted somewhere walking distance. Found a great place, 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, and I thought, well, I went with my friend and said, "What do you think?" He said, "Yeah, great." And we went off and had some lunch and went to the beach and signed the agreement, and it was done and dusted. When we moved in, gosh, we were in for we had a bit of a shock, because at night time they closed that street off and it became the party street.
Oh yeah.
So we only lasted. We grinned and bared it for a year. And it was our first year back in Spain, and we had a great time. But 11 o'clock we're taking the dogs for a walk along the beach, and coming back waiting for the nightclubs to close or the music to be turned down at 12 o'clock. So I'd say, definitely go back morning, noon and night.
Stephen, can I also make a suggestion for you as well? I think if you're trying a new area, if you're not familiar with Spain, you need to see how you feel about it in the summer when it's boiling, and in the winter when it's freezing. Because in my experience, I've lived all over Spain, in the north, in the center, above the Gredos Mountains and below. The winter is freezing in some places, and houses don't have central heating. And I went with t-shirts and shorts, and I needed long johns. And in the summer in the south, it's 40 degrees and it's absolutely sweltering, and your life is at night. And I'm a lark, not an owl. So, I was really stymied by that as well. So I would suggest to you, if you're a newbie to Spain, to try it in winter and
that's
summer.
probably going to meet up with Joanne, and she can show us around initially. We're going to spend 2 weeks over there in October and then drive around the areas herself, with a view to moving over in probably April next year. Yeah.
You have an idea of what region you want to be in?
Well, we're looking at what Alex says, Nerja, and also up near Denia, the top and the bottom.
Yeah, both are great areas, and very different. But
there, of course, as well. So
yeah, Nerja is lovely, and Yeah, some great beaches there. There's a nice expat community. It quietens down a little bit in the winter, but you've got other kind of Malaga's just 40 minutes away, and then not far from Nerja you've got the Herradura, Almuñeca, lovely real Spanish towns, with not as many expats there. And then the Denia, Javea, beautiful areas as well, some great beaches, and there's a kind of I'd say property prices probably similar actually, up in Nerja and Costa Blanca, probably a little more villas available up in the Costa Blanca north area to buy than Nerja, the Nerja area, because there's a limited stock in Nerja and surrounding area. We actually, when we moved back to Spain in 2003, we bought a plot of land in Torx Costa. So I know Nerja quite well, but we bought a plot of land there and we built. So yeah, but yeah, I'd definitely recommend spending, say, at least a week in each place and traveling around.
That's the idea. Look, is it better for somebody to come and to see you or Joanne or whatever when we first saying, right, we're moving to Spain? Will you guide us through every step? Obviously, at a cost, of course, and rather than having to bang your head and keep asking people what did we hear and what we did do there, is it better for just to let one company like yourselves or Joanne says, right, just follow me and I'll tell you what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, what we're doing for a lot of people at the moment is the first step on the journey is to put in place a power of attorney. So a power of attorney is a document that authorizes us to act for you in Spain. Right. And with that power of attorney, we can open a bank account for you and we can apply for your Spanish tax numbers, which are known as NIEs. And that the cost of that is 475 euros. And you're going to need a Spanish bank account sooner rather than later, and you'll need those NIs as well, whether you rent, buy, or what have you. So I'd say that's the first port of call. I'd visit both those areas you mentioned, and then if you find a property to rent, by all means give us a call, send me the rental contract. We'll look at that rental contract for you, discuss it with you, and then if you want to talk offline, talk about those different areas to us, happy to talk to you about those as well.
Right.
Because you've got the buying costs are different. So for example, Costa Blanca is part of the Valencian region. The transfer tax there is 10%. So typically on top of the purchase price of a property, you're going to allow between 13 and 14%. Down here,
they're more likely to be renting for the first year or so.
Yeah, exactly. So rent before you buy is good, but I'm just thinking further down the line. If you then do decide to buy, the transfer tax is slightly more expensive up in the Costa Blanca, and then for example in Andalusia at the moment it's been reduced to 7%. So there's a 3% difference. So I definitely try out both areas. Yeah. Right,
that's great. When do we have to first apply then for a visa? If we go around October, November time and look around various areas at various times, various days, and we're saying, right, we're going over, our contract here runs out in April.
Right.
So when would be the best time to apply for a visa to go over there for the 90 days? Is it?
Yeah. So let's just clarify the rules then. So as a result of the UK leaving the European Union, British people now can only spend 90 days in a 180-day period in Spain. Okay, so you can come out this year, October time you're talking about, you can spend 90 days here and then you've got to leave. If you want to spend more than 90 days, then you've got to apply for a visa. And if you're going to if you're not going to work, then the non-lucrative visa would be the visa for you. And that typically takes about a month or 6 weeks to collate all the documents, and then it can take 3 to 4 months to come through. So I'd probably start the process, which we can help you with, in October.
Right.
Okay. Bear in mind you're aiming to come out in April.
Yeah, October time.
Yeah.
Brilliant, Alex. Thanks very much indeed.
So October, November, you know, so you've got basically 5 to 6 months ready, you know, that you don't have to rush too much then.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Thanks very much indeed.
The only other
my
thing
pleasure.
I would say, Stephen, is you're much better off having an expert helping you with the information, because Spain is notorious of its people behind the bar telling you what
Well,
laws are.
I'm reading all these on the websites, the expat sites, and it's just a minefield.
Yeah, I know.
I just want to go to somebody who says, right, Steve, do this, this, and this, and this, sorted.
Yeah, I think you're safer.
Yeah.
So Stephen, what we have got coming out is we've got a book, or a guide called Moving to Spain. So if you contact us after this, I can send that to you. And then also available on our website or Amazon is our book that we kind of co-write with David Sill, called You and the Law in Spain. So have a look at those books, and that's kind of, you're reading it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Right. Okay. So I can mail you for that. I can just have a chat with you on mail.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
Our pleasure.
One more question. There's just one more question. I don't know if you can answer actually, but what's the reasonable amount to pay an agency who are looking after a short-term holiday let? Have you got any ideas roughly what it would be? Yeah,
I'd say typically you're looking at between 15 and 25 or 30%. You know, I'm thinking of a kind of a holistic service. Someone going in, they're going to do the welcome. They're going to show the people in, and then maybe see them out, arrange the cleaning, and then you'll probably arrange the return of the damage deposit. I'd say, yeah, you're looking at between 15 and 30%.
Brilliant, good. And if nobody else has got any other questions, I think that's us for the afternoon. Good. Thank you very much, Alex. Very helpful. This will go up onto the My Lawyer in Spain YouTube channel. So just search for My Lawyer in Spain on YouTube and you can find it. And you can always send emails to inquiries@My Lawyer in Spain if you've got any questions.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, and have a great weekend. As we would say in Spain, or in Spanish, buen fin de semana.